Have you ever noticed something strange about yourself? You start things with intense passion, a new skill, a new goal, a new version of yourself. For a while, you're obsessed. You think about it all day. You imagine how far it could take you, and then something shifts. The excitement fades. Your attention moves somewhere else. And suddenly, you're telling yourself the same painful story again. I can't stick to anything. I'm lazy. I have no discipline. There must be something wrong with me? But what if that story is wrong? What if the very thing you've been judging yourself for is actually a rare psychological advantage? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might quietly change the way you see yourself forever. Let's start with a hard truth most people never question. Discipline is not the same as consistency, and consistency is not the same as identity. From childhood, we're conditioned to believe that successful people are linear. One goal, one path, one obsession. For decades, school rewards this. Jobs reward this. Society glorifies this. So when your mind doesn't work that way, you feel broken. But psychology tells a very different story. Some minds are not built to go deep in one narrow tunnel. Some minds are built to explore wide landscapes. And those minds often suffer the most because they're forced to live in a world that misunderstands them. Here's the question I want you to sit with for a moment. What if you don't quit because you're weak, but because your brain is wired for range, not repetition? Psychologists call this multipotentiality, often seen in polymath-type personalities. These are people with high curiosity, sensitivity. Their brains light up, not from repetition, but from learning, connecting, and synthesizing ideas across domains. Your motivation system doesn't run on discipline alone. It runs on meaning, novelty, and internal alignment. When novelty disappears, your nervous system disengages. Not because you don't care, but because your mind is already searching for the next pattern to understand. And here's the part no one explains to you. That doesn't mean you failed, that means the task stopped feeding your psychology. But now comes the emotional layer. Because every time you stop, your ego steps in. It whispers, "Look at you again. You always do this. Other people can stay focused. Why can't you? You're falling behind." This is where insecurity grows. Not because you lack ability, but because you keep comparing a non-linear mind to a linear system. Social comparison quietly poisons your self-identity. You don't just think, "I stopped." You start thinking, "I am the type of person who never finishes." And once that identity forms, your brain works hard to prove it true. This is how self-sabotage is born. Not from laziness, but from a misunderstood self-concept. Let's go deeper. Many polymath-type minds grew up in environments where curiosity was praised at first, but punished later. As a child, you asked questions, you explored different interests, you absorbed information quickly. But eventually, someone said, "Focus. Choose one thing. Stop jumping around." That moment matters more than you think, because your nervous system learned something subtle. That being yourself creates pressure. That exploration leads to disappointment. That your natural rhythm is inconvenient. So part of you learned to associate sticking with things with emotional discomfort. That this creates internal resistance. Not conscious resistance, but psychological friction. You don't quit because you don't care. You quit because part of you feels trapped the moment curiosity turns into obligation. Now, here's a mini cliffhanger most people miss. What if your problem isn't starting too much, but finishing the wrong way? Polymath minds don't finish in straight lines. They finish in loops. They gather fragments. They cross-pollinate ideas. They return later with deeper insight. But modern productivity culture only recognizes one type of completion, and because your form of progress isn't visible, you assume it doesn't count. It does. In fact, some of the most influential thinkers in history struggled with the same pattern. They weren't disciplined machines, they were meaning-driven explorers. Their power wasn't persistence through boredom. It was the ability to connect dots others couldn't even see dots of what's actually happening when you can't stick to anything. Your brain is constantly asking one question: is this still aligned with who I am becoming? When the answer turns into no, motivation collapses. Not because you're irresponsible, but because identity is your fuel. This is why forcing discipline never works long-term for you. Discipline without identity creates burnout. Discipline without meaning creates quiet resentment. Discipline without psychological alignment feels like self-betrayal, and your nervous system refuses to cooperate with that. Here's the shift most people never make. You don't need more discipline. You need a different structure, a structure that allows exploration without shame, a structure that values synthesis, not just repetition, a structure where quitting isn't failure, but data. When you reframe your identity from "I can't stick to anything" to I am someone who gathers depth through diversity. Something powerful happens. Your self-respect returns. And when self-respect returns, consistency follows naturally. Not forced, but chosen. Let me ask you something personal. What if the reason you feel restless is because you were never meant to live small? What if your mind resists commitment not because it fears effort, but because it fears confinement? And what if learning to work with your psychology, instead of against it, is the real discipline you've been missing? Here's the final psychological takeaway. I want you to sit with. You are not inconsistent. You are complex. You are not unfocused. You are wide-focused, and you are not broken because you don't fit a system that was never designed for minds like yours. The moment you stop trying to shrink yourself into discipline and start designing your life around meaning, curiosity, and identity, is the moment your so-called weakness quietly becomes your greatest advantage. And once you see that, you'll never judge yourself the same way again. If this felt like it was speaking directly to you, that's not an accident.